So I would love to take this opportunity to read Marcia Joe's bio, which is extensive. So listen to this. She's the founding executive director of the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU. She's a native West Virginian who has lived in Florida for 60 years. She has been a trailblazer in the American and Floridian Jewish communities, serving national, state, and local organizations, and has broken the glass ceiling as the first woman in many positions. Her focus for the past 40 years has been to research, collect, document, and preserve the hidden 250 plus years of Florida Jewish history, and creating a statewide history museum with an archive, exhibits, publications, and educational programs. Marcia Joe initiated the legislation for both Florida Jewish History Month and each January, and Jewish American Heritage Month each May, to increase awareness of the contributions of Jews to the quality of life for all. Her seminal book, Jews of Florida, Centuries of Stories, was released in 2020. So everybody, please welcome Marcia Joe Zerivitz.
And thank you so much, Deborah. It's good to see you again. We meet as the world awaits the geopolitical ramifications of Iran's attack on Israel early Sunday morning. And my slides are not moving.
You know, everything works fine in rehearsal.
Of course.
Isn't that always the case?
So,
And do have you as co-host? I think it's on your end.
This has never happened before.
Try it now. No.
Maybe I should sign out and sign in again. Should we try that?
No. Try to exit your PowerPoint and go back on it.
Do what? For your interest. And thank you for your interest in this very timely topic that is always timely. Anti-Semitism is increasingly impacting our daily lives. It's important to know where anti-Semitism comes from, and this gives you knowledge and power. Anti-Semites actually want to erase Jewish history. As you well know, 6 months and 186 days ago on October the 7th, Hamas attacked Israel to slaughter Jews and destroy the Jewish state. The Hamas covenant claims that there will be a day when all Jews will be killed, eradicated, exposed so much misinformation to erupt into the public square like a burst sewage pipe. The template used against Jews is always the same. Jews are all powerful, all wealthy, conniving, evil, devils, and tricky. We work behind the scenes and have dual loyalty. We see anti-Semitism today in music, film, sports, at work, on campus, and constantly in the news globally. The reality is that anti-Semitism has become normalized and fashionable. Jews represent just 2.4% of the US population and less than 1/4% globally. Yet much of the world thinks that everything Jews do is wrong and that all wrongs are done by Jews. Following the start of the Israel-Hamas war, anti-Semitism was up 400% in the United States, 1,350% in London, and just as bad in France and the rest of Europe. The American Jewish Committee reports that most American Jews feel less safe than they did prior to October 7th and think that anti-Semitism is a problem. This was one of the largest gatherings of Jews in U.S. history at a time when the war in Gaza sharply divides public opinion around the world. American Jews of all ages made it clear that all we want is to live freely and safely, without fear of harassment and violence, simply because we are Jews. When the American Revolution began in 1775, every nation in Europe had an official state-supported Christian faith, and the Ottoman Empire had the Islam faith. But here in the United States, since the American Revolution, everyone has had religious liberty and the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. In 1790, George Washington said, and I quote, "All possess the immunities of citizenship, and the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance," end quote. But there is a large bigoted faction in the United States that believes we should be a Christian nation. God and Country, the documentary film, follows the history and recent activities of Christian nationalism, the belief that the United States is ordained by God to be a white Christian nation, and that this should influence United States policies on abortion, public education, immigration, and so on. The Southern Poverty Law Center identifies more than 1,200 active hate groups in the United States today. The states with the highest number of hate groups are California with 103 and Florida with 89. About 30 million people in this country believe that hate groups, people support, they believe this dogma and support hate groups networked across our nation. The security of the American Jewish community is threatened by modern versions of age-old ideas that Jews are different, are devils conspiring to control the world, and harvesting the blood of Gentile children for rituals. Racism and hate crimes are on the rise for many other groups, Blacks, Asians, women, and Central American immigrants, for example, where the Great Replacement Theory, or the GRT as it's called, embraces the idea that Jews are orchestrating a campaign to replace white people with people of color because the latter are impotent. And the United States Census does predict that white people will become a minority by 2045. Elon Musk espouses GRT on his Twitter. These hate groups include white nationalist groups such as the Patriot Front and the Proud Boys. We have seen a huge rise in fascist activity. Neo-Nazis take to the streets today, waving swastikas and chanting the Jew is the devil, and Jews rape children and drink their blood. Hate propaganda is all around us with continuous assault, especially on Jews and other minorities, including the Blacks. To purify the race, the National Socialist Movement advocates an America in which only those with white, Northern European, or Nordic or Aryan ancestry can be citizens, hearkening back to the U.S. laws of murdering Indians, then forcing survivors onto reservations, back to slavery, Jim Crow, and immigration quotas. These are all things that have occurred in the United States. Nordic relates to the Germanic peoples of Northern Europe, characterized by tall stature, a long head, light skin and hair, and blue eyes. Copying America, this was the goal of Hitler, who was emboldened by America's eugenics theory. This is a set of beliefs and practices aimed at improving the genetic quality of the human population and eliminating the so-called ills or undesirables. Detailed in Isabel Wilkinson's book Caste, and I hope, Deborah, you have that in the library, eugenics became a popular social movement peaking in the 1920s and 30s here in the United States. Hitler advocated selective breeding of Aryan traits beginning in 1933. He defined the Aryan race as non-Jewish whites, deemed them superior to all other races, and began his campaign to dehumanize all subhumans, a category that included Jews. We saw these people in Charlottesville, white supremacists marching while chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and the 11 Jews murdered in the Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018 are bold reaffirmations of the centuries-old replacement theory. We saw these people on January the 6th, 2021, the toxic blend of ethno-religious identity politics reflected in the religious symbols that participants carried that day. Our politics are animated by two conflicting moral issues. Is America a divinely ordained promised land for European Christians? Or is America a pluralistic democracy where all stand on equal footing as citizens? That's the question. Why are we discussing Jew hatred, the dehumanization of the other? As just one example of thousands of incidents across our country and our campuses, on March 11th, 2024, this was the headline of a letter to the I missed that slide. Anti-Semitism is the normalized and fashionable cause of the times. The least informed protesters end up being the loudest. I encountered this huge protest in New York City, and it was frightening to be there in person. Most American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29 have experienced anti-Semitism online, and some support the Palestinians' humanity plight and want Israel to stop the war, to stop defending Jews. Many of our young generation lack the depth and knowledge of Jewish history. Israel is at war against generations of Jew hatred. The anti-Zionist hatred we are seeing in the United States and around the world today is a result of canceling our long history, of the reality of Jews living in what is now Israel, since the first recorded arrival and accepting the United Nations partition plan for statehood in 1947, when the Palestinian Arabs did not accept it. They have turned down the opportunity to have their own state 8 times, and now they want all the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea with Israel, no Jews. How did we get here? Over the past 2,024 years, there have been myths and tropes about Jews that continue to creep into current events. One is that powerful Jews control the banks. This comes from Shakespeare's 16th century Merchant of Venice and the role of the greedy moneylender Shylock, who literally demands a pound of flesh for repayment of a loan. Although Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice in 1597, a time when no Jews were even allowed to live in England, he based Shylock on earlier medieval stereotypes, linking Jews with money and power. Shylock's large hook nose depicts Jews as animal-like and greedy, and has since become a defining and persisting element of the Jewish stereotype that has been exploited in political propaganda, cartoons, artworks, and on social media. If you read about or saw the movie Maestro, you know there was criticism about Bradley Cooper's use of a prosthetic nose for his portrayal of Leonard Bernstein, a proud Jew and Zionist who refused to change his name. A sign of our fractious, polarized anti-Semitism soaked times is that publicity about the film focused on Cooper's fake Jewish nose, calling it Jew face, and fueling anti-Semitic stereotypes on social media. Anti-Semitism rejects Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation. What we are hearing from around the globe, plain and simple, Jews have no right to exist. Launched in 2005, the BDS, or Boycott, Divest, Sanction, opposes Zionism. BDS works to economically boycott Israel and end international support for what they call Israel's oppression of Palestinians, with the goal of eliminating Israel entirely. This progressive rhetoric and anti-Israel sentiments, like Israelis are worse than Hitler, have contributed to the hostile college and university campus atmosphere Jewish students face today, when they are called racist and oppressors of the Palestinians if they support Israel, when support for Israel as a Jewish homeland is an important component of being Jewish. Supporting Israel does not mean all Jews support all the government policies, which is the same for being American. Not all of us support all of our government's decisions, and that does not make us anti-American. A strong predictor of a hostile climate on campus toward Israel and Jews is the presence of an active Students for Justice for Palestine, or SJP, group. Another challenge is the trend for some professors, fueled by tens of billions of dollars of Arab petrodollars, to espouse hate against Jewish students in Israel with apartheid, colonialist, racist, and blood libel theories in curricula. After October the 7th, many university presidents wrote letters of support for terrorists rather than defending Israel. Universities administrators must learn how to support and recognize anti-Semitism and strongly condemn it. They must ensure that all students, including Jews, have equal access to their school as a safe environment to learn and Jewish students are targeted and threatened daily, and administrations are not responding. This was the focus of the December 5th, 2023 congressional hearing, when these three presidents of prestigious universities were asked if calling for the genocide of Jews violated the code of conduct at their schools. All three gave evasive answers. Genocide is morally abhorrent. There was no moral clarity here. They had failed to extend institutional protection to their Jewish students when they would have condemned calls for violence against other historically marginalized groups. This is anti-Semitism, treating Jews differently, having a double standard. If a student's educational mission is disrupted, like they fear going to classes, that is a violation of the First Amendment and anti-Semitism. We hear about DEI, divest, equity, and inclusion. These are values held by those working to be supportive of different groups of individuals. But DEI throws people just into two categories: non-whites or oppressed, or whites as the oppressors. Clear and simple. The campus administration does not know what to do with Jews. DEI does not want to address anti-Zionism. Jewish students became eligible for Title VI protection in 2004, and still anti-Semitism is not integrated into DEI, as it focuses on Black, Asian American, and Native Americans. Jews are seen as white, privileged oppressors. This is why Jewish students feel isolated. In 12 states, including Florida, DEI has actually been banned. It was banned at the University of Florida, which is a good thing. All over the country, pro-Israel students are organizing protests in support of Israel. When they are heckled and not allowed to be heard, it is a violation of the First Amendment. Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act specifically bans certain forms of anti-Semitic and related forms of discrimination. In other words, public universities could lose their funding if Jewish students are not protected. The Holocaust was the most extreme example of anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial is the odious contention that Hitler didn't arrange the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others on his quest for racial purity. 60% of Americans today cannot name one concentration camp and do not know how many Jews perished in the Holocaust. 2/3 of millennials do not know what Auschwitz is. Some states have removed Holocaust literature from school libraries on the ground that they are inappropriate for children. Thank you to the universities that are displaying, like this example at FIU, this replica of a Nazi boxcar used for human transport to death camps. There was a powerful multimedia presentation on the inside of this boxcar. The lessons of the Holocaust are: 1, dehumanization; 2, when people say they are going to kill you, believe them; and 3, never again. The slogan should continue to, and we should continue to do all we can to ensure that Jews and all minorities will not be victims again. This boxcar illustrates the perils of anti-Semitism. It is a stark reminder of where unchecked hatred and mob mentality can lead, and a compelling statement to stand up to hate. Most scholars agree that anti-Semitism goes back to the beginning of the church 2,300 years ago, and to the time of medieval blood libels and plagues in Europe, when Jews were blamed. Like COVID-19, anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates with each generation. During COVID, we saw a tsunami of anti-Semitic hatred, especially on the internet and social media, that falsely blamed Jews for having invented the coronavirus, for intentionally spreading it, profiting from it, or using it as a tool for global control. Social media is flooded today with posts like "Hitler was right" and "6 million was not enough." As early as 1919, Hitler wrote, and I quote, "Our final objective must be the total removal of Jews altogether." The world ignored him then, and the world continues to ignore acts of anti-Semitism. In 2016, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance got international consensus on this detailed definition of anti-Semitism, and many government agencies have adopted this guideline, which is a good thing. I bolded all the ones relating to Israel, and these illustrate what is happening now. I'm going to pause so you can skim through these. Focusing on just one aspect, double standards. Think, the United States lost 2,996 people in the 9/11 terrorist attack. We scorched the earth to destroy al-Qaeda. The 1,200 plus casualties Israel suffered on October the 7th would be equivalent to 45,000 people in the United States. Can you imagine the response if the United States lost 45,000 people in a terrorist attack? And 9/11 did not include the barbarity and hostage taking of Hamas. The brutality of the October 7th massacre forced Israel to move. Hamas knew Israel would have no choice but to invade Gaza, which Israel had vacated in 2005 to rid it of terrorists. The feelings are the same as it was for 9/11: profound shock, unbearable grief, humiliation, rage, and solidarity. Hamas threatens Israel's very existence. That's the big difference. Within the definition of anti-Semitism, there are many categories of anti-Semitism. We have classic anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths and tropes, which I'm going to talk about. We have positive references to or promotion of known anti-Semitic personalities. We have QAnon, a far-right cult with references to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, Holocaust denial, false flags, epithets used for Jews, like the word kike, which is intended as a slur, but it's really not. It's a Yiddish word for little circle. That's what kike means. When Jews came to Ellis Island, if they could not write their name, they used a circle as their signature. They refused to use the X, which they were instructed to do, because to them, this represented the cross of Christianity. A few examples. This lurid caricature of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken uses the facts that Blinken is Jewish and a stepson of a Holocaust survivor. Throughout history, anti-Semites have used overt tropes like enlarged noses, horns that betray the devil, and accusations of global control to sway the public against Jews. Here, wearing a flag of the U.S. as a cape and clutching a COVID report, it implies that the Jews started COVID. During COVID, these anti-Semitic flyers were distributed heavily around the country and in Florida, proclaiming the COVID-19 pandemic to be a Jewish plot and emblazoned with the Star of David and a red pentagram, which is a reference to Satanism. This distribution was executed by a neo-Nazi group that uses the Jewish control of the world theme. Another use of tropes is in a conspiracy theory is this Israeli flag making the Star of David with vaccine syringes because some vaccine manufacturers are Jewish. In modern popular culture, 666 is a widely recognized symbol for the devil. In April of 2022, a leading Muslim Palestinian scholar went on a bizarre rant on Turkish television claiming that the Jews started the war in Ukraine in order to establish a new Jewish state there, and are now saying that the temple and biblical Jerusalem are located in Ukraine and not in Palestine. The fantasy about Jewish power is pervasive. It's anti-Semitism. It's all about the Benjamins is a rap song and a progressive U.S. Congresswoman's referencing Benjamin Franklin on the $100 bill. They think Israel gets support from Congress because of the pro-Israel lobby AIPAC. The real reason is that Israel is a democratic ally with shared values, shared military development and intelligence systems in a dangerous part of the world. The reality is that AIPAC ranks 20th on the recent list of congressional donors, giving a paltry $4.5 million compared to the $95 million that retiree interest groups donate. No, Israel is not a European colonialist state, which is what we're hearing also today. Only 30% of Israeli population is of European origin, and they were not colonials. They did not represent a foreign power when they came to Israel. Endless pieces of archaeological evidence show that the Jewish people are indigenous to Israel. It is the only nation on earth that inhabits the same land, bears the same name, speaks the same language, and worships the same God that it did 3,000 years ago and 1 millennium before Muslims. No, Israel is not a racist or an apartheid state. Arabs represent 20% of Israel's citizens. I want to repeat that. Arabs represent 20% of Israel's population, and they have equal rights and are part of the Knesset, their parliament, and the Supreme Court, and have notable presence in universities and hospitals. Arabs who have Israeli citizenship have more rights and opportunities in Israel than in any Arab country. No, Israel does not engage in ethnic cleansing. In 1948, the Arab population in Israel was 156,000. To today, it is 2,100,000. Conversely, in 1948, the Jewish population in Muslim countries was close to 1 million. Today, it is under 12,000 because the Jews have been eradicated in those Arab countries. No, the Jewish people are not a privileged group. For 2,500 years, Jews in Europe and North Africa were persecuted wherever they lived, facing expulsions, pogroms, and genocide. All these accusations are anti-Semitism. A continuing challenge is the anti-Zionist teaching in Palestinian schools, where the children are taught from textbooks provided by the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, that promote conspiracy theories with one purpose: to hate and kill Jews and eliminate Israel. That is not even on their maps. The Arab League is comprised of 21 Arab states, representing 650 million people in 5 million square miles. Israel has about 7 million Jews and less than 10,000 square miles, including Judah, Samaria, and the Golan. So the Arabs are 100 times as numerous as Israeli Jews and spread over an area 500 times the size of Israel, which is actually the size of New Jersey. Also, there are more than 50 Muslim-oriented countries, among them 27 that are officially Muslim. They and much of the world reject the right of one Jewish state. Ask any anti-Zionist, why are the Palestinians entitled to separate land when the Jews are not? Why have none of these Arab or Muslim states taken in the Palestinians since 1948, when their leaders told them before Israel's War of Independence, leave Palestine and you will return when the Jews have been pushed into the sea? These are all threats to Jews, but this is not just about Jews, and that's what we really have to remember here. The threats to Jews have always been the canary in the coal mine, a warning that society is breaking down and every group is at risk, every minority group: Muslims, African Americans, Asian Americans, LGBTQ, women, and others. We must never become complacent about any threats to any people. If hate against any minority is allowed to fester, it damages all people. Anti-Semitism creates distrust in government, because if there are feelings that one group controls the media, the banks, the government agencies, and so forth, people feel, why trust democracy? In 1946, German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller said it best, and I quote, "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not Jewish. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Many books, plays, and films continue to be written about anti-Semitism. Jew hatred is the most persistent, pervasive, and pernicious of all hatreds known in the world. Why? How did anti-Semitism begin? In 1936, Sweden author Hugo Valentin wrote, "It is not the Jews who are hated, it is an imaginary image of them." An example of this actually happened to me after my daughter was born. In 1967, I was living in Orlando and went on my first outing in the neighborhood with my infant daughter. My neighbor next door, who was an educated woman who had lived all over the world, rushed out and said to me, "Oh, I have been so eager to see your baby, as I've always heard that Jews are born with horns. Can I see the horns?" This myth originates with the most important finished piece of sculpture of Michelangelo, his 1513 marble statue of Moses, after receiving the Ten Commandments from God. At the time the statue was completed, the Catholic Church had just declared the 4th century Latin translation of the Hebrew Bible as the standard edition for Catholics, for Christians. St. Jerome had translated the Hebrew term Keren, Keren, meaning ray of light, as horn. The social position of Jews and their depictions in Christian art had become increasingly negative since the 11th century, then, and reached a low point in the 16th century. Jews were identified with the devil and were commonly depicted with horns, a slanderous stereotype that exists to this day. I wrote a book on the Jews of Florida, if you were at my last talk here at the Leesburg Library. In the 1980s, I trekked 250,000 miles around the Sunshine State over 8 years to unearth the hidden history. I had to learn the historical context of Florida history to present the Jewish history. And I discovered a story of discrimination. Did you know that 511 years ago, in 1513, when Ponce de Leon discovered Florida, only Catholics could settle here? Because Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, Spain became the owner of Florida. It was during the Inquisition, so only Catholics could live in Florida for the next 250 years. This is anti-Semitism. Why this hatred of Jews? I organized my material to illustrate, one, that anti-Semitism is not a monolithic, inflexible set of ideas that transfers from one generation to another. Indeed, among the secrets that explain its uncanny longevity is of this form of hatred is its ability to adapt to widely divergent social conditions. It is a virus that mutates from generation to generation. And two, the power of imagery and social media are used in communicating the agenda of hatred. We live in an intensely visual age. Our worldviews unconsciously shaped by powerful media and advertising engines. Anti-Semitism should be spelled as one word with a small s and no hyphen. I am proud to claim that I initiated discussion in dozens of editorial meetings around the country about this, and I was very successful. This spelling is rational. There is no such thing as Semitism to be anti. German Wilhelm Marr created the term in 1879. The same year, he promoted the idea that all Jews must be removed by force from Germany as they were a threat. Marr argued that there exists a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world called Semitism that was ardently opposed by his followers, the anti-Semites. Absurd. Jews were never plotting to take over the world. Semitic refers to actually to a family of languages originating in the Middle East, whose descendant languages today are spoken by millions of people across Western Asia and North Africa. These people are not necessarily anti-Semitic, but following this logic, the conjunction of the prefix anti with Semitism indicates anti-Semitism as referring to all people who speak Semitic languages. Also absurd. Anti-Semitism has always meant Jew hatred. Jew hatred was present in the ancient world, including Greco-Roman persecutions and the Babylonian exile. We celebrated Purim last month, a story of anti-Semitism going back to the 4th century BCE, which was at the end of the exile period. Because Jews were different, the Persians wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, just as Hamas does today, 2,300 years later. How has the world's response to Jews evolved? Over 2,000 years, Jews, the different people, experienced expulsions from 109 different countries. This map shows just 400 years of expulsions of Jews from 1100 to 1500. The Spanish Inquisition, which lasted from 1478 to 1834, with the expulsion decree from Spain in 1492 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, is the most well-known of all the expulsions. Anti-Semitism finds its most sustained roots in Christianity. In ancient times, before Christianity, there was a xenophobia or fear of anyone who was different. Jews were seen as different because they did not worship pagan idols. They worshiped a God that couldn't even be seen at all. Jews ate differently and had different rituals like circumcision for newborn males, but they were not persecuted and slaughtered for these differences. Anti-Jewish sentiment gained steam as Christianity started because of the deicide charge that Jews killed Jesus. Roman Catholic author Malcolm Hay wrote 70 years ago that, quote, the Holocaust would have been impossible had it not been for the poisonous lies with which the churches have infected Christian population for 2,000 years, end quote. Most current scholars and Christian theologians today contend that anti-Semitism that we know today came with Christianity. In addition to the claim of Christians that Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus, it was also the reality that most Jews did not accept the new version of religion. So there was a pent-up hatred against the mother religion, Judaism. The conflict between church and synagogue was rooted as the church sought converts. The majority of Jews did not enter this new sect. So how did the Christians win converts? By attacking Judaism. But Judaism did not disappear and in fact gained its vitality in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And this posed a challenge to Christianity. The church's attacks on Jews continued to strengthen. All Jewish misfortunes are blamed on the fact that the Jews did not accept Jesus as their God. Today, many Americans still believe that Jews killed Jesus as a result of preaching and artworks, which I'm going to share with you. Think about it. Our concepts of heaven and hell are derived from artworks. In the same way, the concept of Christian hatred of Jews was also derived from artworks. Like the song in South Pacific, you have to be taught to hate. And the teaching was done through degenerate art. The images I show you were created to make people believe that Jews are the others, different, hateful, despicable, devils, even evil insects. This illustration is called the scourging of Jesus. One reason often given for anti-Semitism is that Jews rejected and killed Jesus. Although the Christian Bible in Matthew chapter 27, verses 22 through 25 says the Romans are responsible for Jesus's death by crucifixion, this 13th century artwork illustrates the notion that the Jews killed Jesus. Note the peaked hats on the men on each side. This was a symbol that these men were Jewish, a requirement by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, so the Jews could be identified outside the ghetto. All the Jewish males had to wear peaked hats, and I'm going to be showing you this type of imagery several times. The Christian Bible said Jews were accomplices, yet the accomplices are persecuted throughout history and not the Romans, who were the actual killers of Jesus. The Second Vatican Council in 1963 officially exonerated the Jews as the killers of Jesus, which is the greatest ideological transformation in human history, and yet this has not lessened anti-Semitism. This painting depicts church and synagogue, a common motif of medieval art in church paintings. On the left is Ecclesia and Synagoga communicated the New Testament's complex Pauline doctrine of election that argued for the church's inheritance of the divine favor which were originally given to the Jewish people. You see on the left a very dignified image of a confident crowned woman depicting the church. She holds the Holy Grail, and an intact staff is contrasted on the right with another female figure representing the synagogue, usually portrayed in this aspect of decline. In the synagogue, the tablets of the law are falling from her hand. The bannered staff representing her prior sovereignty is broken. and the blindfold prevents her from perceiving Christian truth. Each of the details was especially useful to illiterate peasants and is repeated hundreds of times in European art. This image portrays the supplanting of Judaism by Christianity in a very violent manner. On the right, you see the synagogue is depicted with a bloodied sword being driven through her head, cutting off Judaism from God. And on the left, the church is crowned by the heavenly hand of God. Church is portrayed with dignity, riding on a majestic mythical animal representing the Gospels, while the synagogue on the right rides a mere donkey and loses her crown while she holds fast to a slaughtered ram's head, symbolic of the so-called carnal nature of Judaism. In 2019, the world was transfixed on the images of flames and smoke spewing from the burning roof of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This religious icon dates from the 12th century when Jews were expelled from France. Even so, if you look closely on the very bottom line here, you see the garments, the special garments that the Jews in Paris were required to wear with the peaked hats. I hope you can see them, the tall, pointy hats to identify them. Two prominent statues on the facade of Notre Dame captured the feelings of Christians and Jews when construction began in 1163. On the right, the Jewess stands ragged, defeated, her eyes are covered by a snake, and her head is bowed, so she cannot see clearly because she has not accepted Christianity. She holds a broken scepter again, and the tablets of law again are slipping from her grasp. Under her feet lies a crown trodden into the dust. She is synagogue. The Catholic Church wanted those entering Notre Dame to believe that Judaism was finished, humiliated. On the left is a finely dressed, triumphant woman carrying a chalice and a staff with a cross. She is known as Ecclesia, the victorious Catholic Church. So important were these allegories of Christian dominance and Jewish humiliation that when the originals were destroyed during the French Revolution, they were recreated and replaced in the 1800s. Notre Dame is set to reopen in December of this year after the fire. Through the medieval period, which is the 5th to the 15th centuries, these images portray the theological doctrine of election from the 1400s, that Jews are no longer the chosen people of God and have been replaced by the Christians. Here, church lovingly supervises the burial of her predecessor, the synagogue. You see the synagogue is laying in the coffin. The relationship between Judaism and Christianity is expressed as one of clear succession. Synagogue, still wearing the crown depicting her prior sovereignty and holding on to the two tablets of law, is dead in the coffin and is replaced by Christianity. In the 12th century, anti-Semitism gained momentum with the blood libel that was invented in England in 1144 and spread rapidly throughout Europe. The blood libels were a central component in the development of modern anti-Semitism in the 19th century. The church spread the claim that the Jews needed to capture innocent Christian children's blood to reenact the crucifixion of Jesus, that the Jews killed the Gentile children and drained their blood to make matzahs for Passover. This 1475 woodcut depicts Jews abducting Simon of Trent and draining his blood. Of course, the idea is absurd, not least because the tiniest speck of blood in food renders it inedible in kosher law. It's not kosher in Jewish law. Notice that each of the Jews is labeled with their name on the traditional Jewish peaked hat. The conclusion of the blood libel trial was often the massacre of an entire Jewish community. Here, Jews, identified again by the Jewish peaked hat of the Middle Ages, are bound naked to wheels and set ablaze as Christian priests look on. Blood libel was combined with allegations of well poisoning by Jews during the time of the Black Death in the middle of the 14th century. By the 15th century, the motif was commonplace throughout Western and Central Europe. In these times, during the Israel-Hamas war, a rocket fired by Hamas from Gaza toward Israel fell short after launching and hit the hospital next to the rocket launcher in Gaza City, killing over 500 people of their own killing over 500 of their own people. Of course, Israel was blamed, calling out blood libel by the international press. The Arabs still spread the libel of Jews killing Christian children to use their blood. In 1986, the Syrian defense minister embraced it in his book, Matzah of Zion. He argues that every Passover, Jews kidnap a child, places the child in a barrel of nails so the body is pierced, and from a faucet in the barrel pours the blood to use in the making of matzah. The devil demanded it of them, they said. In 1991, Matzah of Zion was translated into English and praised by the United Nations Human Rights Commission as a valuable book that unmasks the racist, murderous character of Zionism. In 1517, Martin Luther launched the Protestant Reformation, but when he failed to convert many Jews, his agitation morphed into hatred, and he turned against them. He said, their synagogue should be set on fire, and what does not burn must be covered over with earth, so that no man will ever see stone or cinder of them again. Their houses also should be razed and destroyed. All their prayer books should be taken from them. End quote. In this environment, anti-Semitic tropes were expressed through art like this medieval Christian folk image. This was the most obnoxious one that I found in my research. It recently was posted near the Rothschild home in Frankfurt, Germany, called Judensau, which is German for Jew's sow or female pig. It's an image of Jews on their knees, suckling the pig's teats, and a rabbi with his tongue thrusting it into the anus of the pig. Really disgusting. And its popularity has lasted for over 1,000 years. Notice the devil is there, identified by the round badge mandated for Jews to wear from the earlier 13th century. In June of 2022, just less than 2 years ago, there was a federal court case in Germany. A Jew filed the claim to have the sculptures removed, stating, "These sculptures are an inducement to murder." The case was dismissed, but this public challenge sparked conversation about historical and modern anti-Semitism in Germany. There are at least 50 of these Judensau sculptures in Germany today, and they exist throughout Germany. An old fear of Jewish domination, now promoted by QAnon, is the public scorning of the Rothschilds, a German Jewish family. Mayer Rothschild established a banking business in the 1760s, and the business became international when he placed his 5 sons in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. Here, in this artwork, Lord Rothschild is portrayed as a monster controlling the entire world. You see the globe in his hands. He is crowned by a pig, representing hypocrisy, since Judaism prohibits the eating of pork. Notice the date, 1898. This conspiracy has lasted a long time. Shown top left is the House of Rothschild on the front page of Der Stürmer in 1938 Germany. Der Stürmer was the German newspaper. Top right is the logo of a Swiss bank in 2020. Even with the Rothschild fortune greatly declined today, QAnon Rothschild conspiracy theories abound based on prejudice, and they are anti-Semitism. In 2021, during the California wildfires, there was a speculation that a space-based solar generator used in clean energy experiment with the goal of replacing coal and oil beamed the sun's energy back to Earth and started a fire, and that it was the Rothschilds who caused this to happen. Totally absurd. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists claim that the Rothschilds interfered with the American Revolution, financed Nazism and the Bolshevik Revolution, perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, and caused the disappearance of Malaysian Flight 370 in 2014. Of course, all absurd. Another popular Christian folklore was the legend of the wandering Jew that spread in the 13th century and continues. According to one legend, a Jew mocked Jesus on the cross and was thus cursed with eternal life, requiring him to wander from one village to another with no rest or awaiting the second coming of Jesus. Another explanation is that Christianity felt constraints about exterminating the very people from whom they had taken the very best of their teachings, and so there is a doctrine asserting that Jews are to be preserved until the end of time as witnesses to the truth of Christianity. The Dreyfus Affair birthed both modern anti-Semitism and crusading journalism with mass protest. This is an 1895 issue of a French anti-Semitic political newspaper. In 1894, Alfred Dreyfus, a French Jewish army intelligence officer, was arrested, tried, and convicted of being a spy and sent to Devil's Island. There was no evidence against him. What was most significant was that he was a Jew. Note the depiction of the large nose. The military hierarchy pursued the case against Dreyfus, even when it was clear that Dreyfus was innocent. This trumped-up charge was clearly anti-Semitism and awakened fear in all Jews. It took 12 years of social turmoil, violence, and lobbying for him to be finally cleared of the charges. It was not until 2006, 112 years later, that the president of France issued a formal apology and stated that Dreyfus was a loyal officer. The same French newspaper is depicting a world Jewish conspiracy or Semitism to dominate the world. Notice the globe, and the Jew is depicted with a bulbous nose that continues to appear as a stereotype of a Jew. A turning point in the history of European anti-Semitism was the publication in 1903 by Sergei Nilus of the book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the most notorious and widely distributed anti-Semitic publication. This Russian monk claimed to have discovered the minutes of a secret meeting of a fictitious Jewish government that was planning to dominate the world. Although repeatedly exposed as a forgery, the protocols became one of Hitler's favorite books and the warrant for genocide, the pretext for the Holocaust. This image, based on the protocols and reproduced in a 1921 Austrian magazine, depicts the Jew as a multi-faced monster controlling the world. The mushroom that sprouts from the globe symbolizes the ultimate decay that will result of the Jewish dominance. The forgery was introduced into the Arab countries into the 1930s and continues to provoke unprecedented popularity, reprinted into dozens of languages. On the left is the printed version in Great Britain, and on the right is the French version in 1934. The forgery continues to appeal to anti-Semites in the 21st century all over the world. Barnes and Nobles had this display of various versions of the Protocols of Zion on its website until January of 2022, when they were finally removed. They agreed that as anti-Semitism, they agreed that as Jews are being beaten on the streets of London and New York, no business should peddle the debunked Bible of those seeking to murder all Jews. Moving forward, we should demand, each of us, that every online platform stop selling any book that calls for a warrant for genocide. Vote Christian Socialists, German Christians, Save Austria. Interwar German anti-Semitism held Jews responsible for their defeat in World War I. As Jews gained greater prominence through achievements in the arts and sciences, they were perceived to be strangling German culture as depicted here. This German book cover again illustrates that the Jews are agents of decay. It depicts the Jew as a vulture weighing down a beaten Aryan figure, waiting for his death to have his meal, and refers to the racial defilement of the German people through the infiltration of Jews into their society. This is a German election poster, signed AH, 1920. This was supposedly drawn by Adolf Hitler, note the initials. Before his order to murder millions of innocent individuals, Adolf Hitler was an unsuccessful artist. This image carries the idea of the pure Aryan woman marrying a Jew. You see below the figures a coffin symbolizing the decline of the white race. The swastika on the upper left suggests the early interpretation of the swastika, which was actually used nearly 5,000 years ago in India. in Sanskrit, meaning good fortune. To this day, it is a sacred symbol in Indian and Asian cultures. In the 1930s, the German Nazi Party reversed and adopted the swastika as an emblem of the Aryan race. Since the Holocaust, it remains associated with Nazism, neo-Nazis, anti-Semitism, white supremacism, or simply evil. Its use in some countries, including Germany, is prohibited by law today, but not so in the United States. The Nazis expended considerable energy indoctrinating their youth to their anti-Semitic platform. This book illustrates how to recognize a Jew. The healthy Aryan farmer on the left is contrasted with the overweight, large-nosed Jew on the right. Another page in this book, Jewish students and a Jewish teacher are expelled from school under Nazi law to the taunts of Aryan students. This book, printed in Germany in 1938, illustrates the Jew with the big nose as a toadstool, a symbol of decay. This is repeated over and over again. Another, the God is the Jews of money. A stereotypical Jewish stockbroker sits atop a bag of gold. The Nazis claim that Jews commit the gravest crimes to get money. Another, the Jewish nose is bent. It looks like a number 6. A Jewish student conducts a lesson on how to recognize the mythical Jewish nose. Let's look at the great migrations, Jewish immigration from the Pale of Settlement, 1880 to 1928. After the pogroms in 1881, over 2 million Jews left the area of the Russian Empire where Jews were allowed to reside, which today is actually Ukraine. By the time immigration quotas in this country were severely tightened in 1921, 1.8 million Jews from the Russian Empire had made their home in the United States. For Jews, the U.S. was the Golden Medina, a haven from persecution to seek opportunity. In this postcard, a woman with the word America in Yiddish on her hat welcomes the exhausted immigrants. The Leo Frank case in Atlanta was a turning point for all American Jews who had fled Europe to escape anti-Semitism. Here in the United States, no Jew had been killed because they were Jewish until Leo Frank. This racially charged events occurred in Atlanta, Georgia in 1913, the pencil factory murder of Mary Fagan. These were a result of a bigoted press that decided, in spite of more credible suspects, the Jew was rape and murder of Mary Fagan and sentenced him to hang. After exhausting appeals, Frank's lawyers asked for clemency from the governor, who commuted the sentence to life in prison. Enraged, a citizen group lynched Leo Frank. This case galvanized the Anti-Defamation League and revived the Ku Klux Klan. No one was ever arrested for the hanging of Leo Frank. This is a topic of a Broadway show today called Parade. As I showed you earlier, anti-Semitism and the depiction of Jews as different and not wanted led to discriminatory codes in real estate, especially here in Florida. This is Carl Fisher's deed for Miami Beach property in 1915. Jews are not considered of the Caucasian race or white race, so they are excluded from buying his properties. There was much anti-Semitism in the United States in the 1920s. Notable was Henry Ford, probably the most successful and celebrated industrialist on the planet. Ford bought the Dearborn Independent newspaper and used it to publish and distribute free his series of 81 articles titled The Jewish Question in America, which he called the world's foremost problem. His ideas came directly from the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Ford said that the Jews were conspiring to destroy America by encouraging immigration and corrupting Christian morals. Many say the seeds of Holocaust were sown and nurtured through Ford. Hitler actually had a portrait of Hitler on his wall, and he was inspired by Ford's writings, which were quoted in his Mein Kampf. Also during this time, the Immigrant Act of 1921 and 24 closed America to Eastern European Jews. There were Jewish quotas in most universities and professional schools into the 1940s and even later. In 1933, the Nazis gained strength in Germany, and anti-Semitic groups appear in the United States. In the late 1930s, Jewish immigration from Germany to the United States was the target of many anti-Semitic attacks. Printed in 1936, this image demonstrates Nazi sympathies by portraying repulsive Jews washing ashore with the tide in Florida. At this time, Catholic priest Charles Coughlin denounced Jews on the radio to millions of people. This wartime poster depicts a common 20th century anti-Semitic theme, the Jewish domination of America, in particular New York City. The American Jew is portrayed as a communist by the five-pointed Soviet star on his breast. Strangely, anti-Semites also think that the Jews are all greedy capitalists. So how can it be both? Again, absurd. This makes no sense, but neither does anti-Semitism. The gentleman's agreement means an informal exclusion of Jews. The film Gentleman's Agreement opened in New York City in 1947. It was a stinging critique of the discriminatory policies of neighborhoods, resorts, hotels, and hiring practices, and controversial slurs such as the word kike. The villains are part of a gentleman's agreement to keep Jews in their place. In the film, the hero Philip Green is a Gentile writer played by Gregory Peck, who masquerades as a Jew to find out what discrimination feels like. Hotel brochures advertising Gentile clientele were part of the gentleman's agreement. I remember well the day Rabbi Henry Okalika came bounding up the stairs to my office in the Jewish Museum to relate his story. This is a marketing brochure for Eleanor Village, Daytona Beach, Florida, in 1950. The resort had 300 brochures printed with restricted clientele you see on the right. Rabbi Okalika went to meet with the resort owner, Mr. Eleanor, who admitted that he had never met a Jew and initially refused to remove the offensive line. After some creative pressure, Eleanor agreed to the policy change. The offensive phrase restricted clientele was blacked out. But Rabbi Okalika thought this was tacky and offered to personally pay 50% of the cost of reprinting the brochure. After receiving the check from the rabbi, Mr. Eleanor reciprocated by donating the amount to the United Jewish Appeal, and new brochures were printed without the offensive anti-Semitic language. In 1949, a Florida law had ended real estate and hotel discrimination, so Rabbi Okalika was actually helping to enact compliance. But the racism that began with the church has raised its ugly head in various forms over time, and one is the Ku Klux Klan. Started after the Civil War, primarily targeting free slaves, they expanded to include Jews and still intimidate people who are different. Samuel Fleischman had lived in Florida from the 1840s, had a wife and children, and was a respected hardware merchant in Marianna, which is in North Florida. In 1869, the Ku Klux Klan ordered him to leave town because he had defended Blacks and given credit and employment to freed slaves. Fleischman resisted, and when the KKK escorted him out of town, he walked to the state capitol in Tallahassee, where he asked for protection. Getting none, he set out to return to his store and family. The next morning, his dead body was found on the outskirts of the city. His assassins were never apprehended, but many people said KKK. From 1868, the Ku Klux Klan was made up of white, demobilized soldiers of the former Confederate Army. The Klan stood for America. Anything that wasn't red, white, and blue, with an emphasis on white, was wrong. That was Blacks, Catholics, immigrants, and Jews. They were wrong. Today, the Klan continues to be one of the most active groups on the far right and has become integrated with neo-Nazis and skinheads, mounting successful white supremacist rallies throughout the United States and all over Florida. Note the white hooded ornaments on the tree, topped with a swastika. Stormfront, launched in Florida in 1995 as a white supremacist and neo-Nazi internet forum that was the internet's first major hate site. The logo features a Celtic cross surrounded by the motto, White Pride Worldwide. Stormfront has been linked to acts of murder and terror all over the United States. As I said in the beginning, the biggest challenge in fighting anti-Semitism today is the world of the internet and social media. The white supremacist cyber community has a much easier time spreading their message and recruiting new supporters to engage in the most destructive acts. White supremacy is America's burden and challenge for years to come. Following 9/11/2001, a global network of anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists blamed Jews and Israel for the terrorist attacks. This is a manifestation of centuries-old allegations that the Jews are evil and manipulate and control world events. One source said, and I quote, 4,000 Israelis working in the World Trade Center were issued a direct secret directive before the incident not to come in to work on September 11th. This is evident from the fact that not a single Israeli or American Jew working in the World Trade Center was reported killed or missing, end quote. Again, hatred through absurd lies. Many Jews were killed on 9/11. Some Americans are woke, aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues of discrimination, racial prejudice, and injustice, and have taken direct action. Organizations today monitor hate groups and sponsor educational initiatives to dispel the dangers of intolerance. As I said in the beginning, anti-Semitism has become fashionable. We must work together to make it unfashionable. And there is hope. In Germany, since the 17th century, the Passion Play has depicted Jews as the killers of Jesus. In 2022, the play began to portray Jesus as a Jew and clarifies that only the Romans and not the Jews could condemn Jesus to death. Anti-Semitism will not go away completely. The poster on the right is Art Spiegelman's statement that confronting hatred is an inescapable part of the Jewish condition and a reminder never to forget. From the top left of this poster, you see the ancient wandering Jew, to the Holocaust in the center, where he depicts his parents as mice at a crossroads that is a swastika from which the Jews cannot escape, and continuing at the bottom into the next generation in America, where most Jews feel unsafe today. Art Spiegelman is best known for writing Mouse in 1992, the only graphic novel to win the Pulitzer Prize. Mouse depicts Holocaust victims based on what Spiegelman's father told him. The story depicts the atrocities that the Germans committed during World War II and how prescient was Spiegelman's statement that anti-Semitism is an inescapable part of the Jewish condition. Some schools boards have banned Mouse, stating that expletives were inappropriate for 8th graders, even as the U.S. Holocaust Museum said that Mouse is vital in Holocaust education, inspiring students to think critically about the past. Some Broadway shows today are unmasking anti-Semitism and instigating both protesters and productive discussions. This current book about the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States depicts those who defeated it to preserve our democracy here in the United States. To make changes in this battle, we first need awareness of this issue. You have now many facts and knowledge which gives you the power to speak out. And you know what to do. Speak out. If you're Jewish, be proud, know Jewish history, know the facts to call out hate, educate, combat misinformation, appeal to social media to shut down extremists, get involved in civic life, have government officials call out hate over the long haul, and when they do, thank them profusely. Build coalitions. The Jewish community cannot do this alone. We are too small. If you watched the Super Bowl in January, you saw an ad where the Black community is urged to not remain silent in the face of anti-Semitism. The night of the Oscars on March the 10th, another ad to stand up to hate. This demonstrates that not everyone hates Jews. Listen to what others say. If it spews anti-Semitism, start a dialogue. Find out if their view is based on ignorance or ill will. Ask, what do you mean by that? What are your reasons for thinking that? Think, is their answer possible, plausible, probable? Then ask leading questions, cross-examine, explore inconsistencies in their statement. For the first time, our government is involved in fighting anti-Semitism. Last May, President Biden's administration released a strategic plan to combat anti-Semitism with 100 action items and a message that in the United States, anti-Semitism will not prevail. Anti-Semitism was widespread in 1899 when Mark Twain wrote this essay. He said Jews amount to a nebulous, dim puff or stardust, ought hardly to be heard of, have always been heard of because of their extravagance of contributions to the world, all within their hands, tied behind them. Today, Jews comprise, as I said, less than 1/4% globally and are not slowing down even in the face of 20 centuries of hatred. Jews have contributed hugely to the quality of life in every field for everyone, even those who hate us. We need to continue to remind the world that when intolerance is expressed for any minority, our democracy is fragile. Bottom line, we each need to do our part to preserve our democracy. We are striving for days of peace and love and hope, like was recently illustrated on this building in Brooklyn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Through action, you join those who can be